Okay, so I think what we are going to do today in terms of people management is I'm going to try and give you a bit of an overview why this unit is, is going to be studied as a part of this course. What are the key things involved in this unit, and then towards the end, what we will do is we'll try and cover the learning outcome one, which has got two tasks, things like how to basically understand how the structure and culture of the organization affects people within it. Okay. Now. We've discussed, people and, management. So management is a function wherein, you look at basically ways and means to be able to manage resources. And because we are studying this particular unit of people management, that means this unit is a combination or an amalgamation of a topic wherein we will get concepts and theories, frameworks coming from organization and behavior as a unit. In the future, obviously, when you study in level 6, your final year of top-up, you will probably have a unit which is called, say something like organizational change management, OCM. And that final year unit will actually have a lot of things which will be coming in from this particular unit and the unit of people in organization, which was 4.4 that we did in level 4. So this unit basically is a combination of HR and a combination of organization behavior. And the reason why we study this particular unit in the course of business and management is that one of the key things that what we are trying to master when we are studying this business and management course is that we need to be able to understand how do we manage, manage resources, specifically people resources. And then when you are in that managerial position or in the supervisory or, management position wherein you are able to delegate, decide, direct, and also control the activities of other individuals, you need to understand what are the other factors which play into, this particular, what are the other factors which actually play into this, which help you to set an environment wherein people can work with you in teams, people can work with you, to achieve common objectives. So as a people's manager or as a person who's able to manage people at some stage, what you need to be able to do is we need to look at understanding how you put the leadership theories, the management theories, the motivational theories into practice, and what kind of leadership styles you can depict essentially to be able to manage people so that they can deliver jobs or deliver the tasks which have been given to you on time and obviously at the end of the year help you achieve the organizational objectives. Now, there are 4 things in particular that we look at when we look at this particular module. One of the key things in organization when we look at is what is the, when you look at the word organization as a word comes from organize. And when we look at organize is nothing but, you're trying to put together a group of people or a group of resources together to be able to achieve something. And organization would be that you put some sort of a process in the background for it to work seamlessly. That means every time if you have to achieve the same task and do the same task, what you try and do is you try and put some sort of a process behind it, which then has every time the same conclusive effort or brings you to the same conclusion every time you do that process. And that process is nothing but organization. That means you are trying to do repetitive tasks which are organized in this way that each time you do this task or a process, it gives you the same result. So when we look at organization, businesses in particular, they are particularly when we look at them in from a perspective of staff or employees, they work in some sort of structures. That means when you have an organization, if it's a sole trader, as we were discussing earlier, it's a one-man organization. You look at partnerships, a lot of collective people come together and work within partnerships because they think they can contribute to the same objective. So when you bring a lot of people together within an organization or a business, they tend to always work and form a structure. And how does this structure actually impact the output of the organization is what you're going to study in this particular unit. So this unit will bring across amalgamation of a lot of concepts from units like business environment, because an organization gets affected by external factors which are beyond the control of the company or the business. It will also bring in facts and things across from another unit, which is basically communication, and why communication becomes important when we look at managing people. It will also have content and other bits and pieces coming in from cross-referencing, coming in from a unit that we studied, which was called People in Organization at level 4. So this unit is a built up on that, wherein we study things like management style, difference between a leader and a manager, how does leadership, differ from management or management styles, and how do you utilize these theories that we've studied. So, for example, motivational stories we have studied. We've studied things like leadership theories. How do you put these theories into practice, essentially to be able to get results from your staff, from your employees, is what we are going to see in this unit. So, in short, if I have to just rephrase and kind of re-summarize, I think what we are going to look at is we have studied some of this content before, but we are going to put that content that we have studied or the knowledge that we've got from that content into practice by understanding how it can be practically applied within an organization and how we can use it to get the objectives fulfilled or the targets, meet the targets which have been set in the organization. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So let's start off with, say, for example, when we look at, the first learning outcome, wherein it talks about, the organizational culture and what kind of an impact does it have on, the organizational structure and what kind of an impact does it have on the culture. That is what we are going to look at in this first bit. So when you look at the word, structure, what does come to your mind when you hear the word structure?
It's more or less how something's made up, like put together.
Right. So structure is, if you look at the definition of the meaning word, the definition of the word structure, it says the arrangement of relations between parts or elements of something complex. Right. So when do you think people need to put a structure within the organization? I could think of 2 or 3 things. One is when you have too many employees working within a department or within a company. So at some stage you decide that this work needs to be done by this employee, this type of work is to be done by this employee or this staff. And that is where you try and put a structure or an order to the organization, because you feel you have lots of resources, but they're not being either utilized properly or they're all doing the same thing. And at some stage, what we could do is we could bring some order into it. And with that order, it'll help me being more productive or maybe, do more things. Right? So when you look at the process of, say, for example, there are 20 people working within a company and all of them do the same roles. If I bring an HR manager in, the first thing which the person would do is basically come in and he would kind of do a skills test or maybe gauge the skills of all the employees within the company. And he would say, okay, you as a person have skills in accounting, you have a person have skills in management, you have skills in production, sales, marketing, payroll. And what he's going to then do is group them together into a particular, he's going to bring them together into a particular group. And with that group, he's going to assign a set of responsibility or functions to do. And that is what leads to the creation of something called a structure or in specific departments. So when you look at a small organization, like a sole trader, the director or the owner of the business is also the director, he's also the manager, he's also the HR manager. So there are a lot of roles that he does. But when I look at a small medium enterprise or a small medium organization, SME, what I would see is that the organization would have anywhere between 21 to 50 employees, and some of the employees will work within a specific function. And that is done because they are going to be working more productively and giving a better output if I can match the skills of a particular person with the type of function and the role, with the type of roles and responsibility that function requires. And at the end of the day, they have the capabilities, skills, as we call the skill set, and also the experience to be able to deliver that job. So example here would be that I create maybe 3 or 4 departments. One is account and finance, one is business, sales or marketing, and the third one could be operation. So people within the sales and marketing would have skills like they know how to deal with customers, they know how to do cold calling, for example, and in some cases they are good at obviously being in front of the customer to pitch services and give them reasons or convince them with the reasons why they need to buy the company's product and services. The accounting side and finance side of things would be good in managing finance. So some of the people working within that structure would basically be very good at, because they have an accounting background or a qualification, or they have financial qualification, and they might be good at doing bookkeeping, payroll, accounting services, managing invoices, ledgers, and things like that. So they keep a tighter control on the budget and also are able to manage the financial resources well. And that department that at some stage would be called accountant finance department or finance department. So the order and purpose of bringing a structure within the organization is to make sure that there is a specific responsibility with every employee or individual who works within the organization, and at the same point in time, that person then becomes task oriented, and his accountability with regards to a particular role, he gets an accountability with regards to a particular role. So if the finance manager is responsible for managing finance, he knows that he needs to do, and he needs to prepare, say, for example, profit and loss, workflows, cash flows. Towards the end of the year, he needs to manage the accounts and, submit the filing of the accounts has to be done. The person who's looking after payroll would do basic bookkeeping, payroll functions and things like that. And that is his skill set. So a structure of the organization, when it is brought in, it also helps to kind of, when an organization is structured, it helps to bring in effectiveness, productivity, and also a sense of belongingness from the individual perspective into the organization. Now, if I just very briefly touch on the fact that how is the culture related to this structure? So sometimes when you go to, say, as an example, if you visualize that sometimes if you have to go and visit the accounts department in the company, you always will find that, when I go and visit that department for a query or, for a particular piece of information, you find that the department is quite laid back, there is no stress, or maybe they are just, paper based, and everything is process oriented. Do this and you will get that, do this or ask for this and you will get it, things like that. And that kind of, because of the functions they do or the roles and responsibilities they have, you will see that over a point in time, that particular department will actually end up developing a particular culture or a particular state of working. And that particular state of working is nothing but, I would define it as culture. And when you go to, say, for example, sometimes when you visit your colleague in a different department, you kind of make a comment, yet there's something buzzing about you in the department. There is a buzz in your department. There's a buzz in the staff within your department, and those kind of comments basically tend to show that there are a lot of people who are collectively working together, but they are not just collectively working together, but they are intellectually working together, which is something that you feel as a vibe, in terms of, within that particular department that you go. And that seems to form, the culture of the organization, or for that particular department, culture of that department. Reason being that what will happen is that you will typically find that, it's a kind of a social behavior which is exhibited by most of the individuals within that department. So when you go to sales and marketing department, you'll always feel that the people are quite extrovert, they're quite chatty, they are open to having discussions, they're quite forthcoming in the sense they want to openly discuss things, and their nature in general is quite extrovert. That means they're quite outward looking. And that is nothing but basically social behavior that you get to see from each and every individual within that department. And that is why it shapes up, if you collectively look at it, what does that form? It forms the culture of that department, which is central to how everyone operates within that department. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that point that I'm trying to get across clear?
Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, when you see, sometimes you will see that, okay, some people pick up a particular type of job. They say, okay, I'm more suited for back-end office roles, or I'm more suited for front-end roles, or, I'm more suited for customer-facing roles. And these are things which people, these are statements which people make is because of the fact they know their skill set, they know what their preferences are, and at some stage, because of the experience that they work within the organizations, they have got influenced, or have got adjusted in a way that they seem to be working well within a particular type of culture or a set within the organization. And that is where what you get to see is that what we get to basically see is that the culture of the department also at some stage becomes the culture of the organization. So if you look at the big firms like PwC, KPMG, which are the big auditor firms, accountancy firms, here the culture of the organization is basically depicted. Why is it the culture of the organization? Because they see the culture of the staff, the attitude of the staff is actually then expanded, and it kind of portrays what kind of a culture is there in the organization. That means most of the people working within that company are accountants or qualified accountants, or may have some sort of a qualification in the field of accounting and finance, and they understand numbers in terms of the number crunching ability of looking at financial statements, looking at balance sheets, looking at things like cash flows. And that is, in general, somebody's if somebody is looking at joining that organization, they would say that, okay, you need to be an accountant or need to have some sort of a qualification before you can join the company, because that seems to be the generic culture of that organization. Is that clear enough?
Yeah.
Now, another example that you can think of, which is tangential to what we are discussing, is when you look at the armed forces, the British Armed Forces. So if you look at Army, for example, there is a set specific structure and culture within the organization, which is, it is hierarchical in nature. That means a captain is somebody who's senior enough, a major is somebody who's senior than the captain, and obviously a CEO or CO, commanding officer, is also senior enough, and he maintains the full regimental command in terms of doing the functions. So the structure of the organization, which we are talking about armed forces here, is that it is hierarchical. That means there is a command center at the top, and then that command center relays everything to the every other individual within that structure. And the culture is hierarchical because it is very well organized and very clearly defined. Can you relate to that?
In a way, yes.
Yeah. So basically, when you look at the command is in the hands of the commanding officer, CO, which then is basically the highest ranking official within a regiment. And when you look at that, he has the ability to be able to delegate authority to a different number of people within the forces, and that then sets a very clear reporting structure back to him. So an army general at the top will kind of dictate things, set the chain of command, and set the guidelines in terms of how the things need to be done, and then he gets the report back from all the other junior officers within the armed forces. So this is again an example of what is basically a structure. So armed forces, when you look at, they have a different type of structure which is quite hierarchical. It is quite led from a point of view of authority and command, and the culture seems to be that it is very well defined, it is disciplined, it is loyal, and everything is done very meticulously, so that there is no slippage in terms of anything which basically gets left out when you look at the armed forces. Nothing gets left out. So if they give an order, that has to be followed. If you give a command, that has to be done. And the soldier would probably rather prefer to die rather than not have that command or that function fulfilled. So that's another form of an organization wherein you get to see structure, and the structure then influences the type of culture which is there in the organization. On the other hand, let's look at another example. So for example, let's look at maybe a commercial business company like FedEx, for example. You're aware of FedEx, UPS, these are global logistics and delivery firms. Now, FedEx, when you look at over the years, has acquired a lot of other companies, so it's become big. I think in the early 2010, 2011, FedEx acquired a company called Kinko's. Now, Kinko's was basically, an office and printer company wherein, you could go into a remote office, utilize some of the printing services, and that they promoted, again, an American business, but they promoted it as a service wherein small businesses, individuals, sole traders, people who work independently or are contractors could actually utilize the services of this company, which had set up a lot of centers across the, various places. And you could go in, use it as an office, use the office, do your printing or, whatever internet emailing stuff, and then pay for those number of services that you've used and then be done with it. So FedEx, what it did was it basically wanted to change the structure. It wanted to kind of bring in another set of business into its fold. And what it did is it basically acquired Kinko's as a company. And Kinko's was basically known as an office and print center, which is like, shared offices in business centers and things like that. Now, when the two companies came together, they had very different business models. So FedEx was a courier or a logistics company. Kinko's was an office and print center. That means it provided office-related services as a white label to any and everybody within the country. So when the two came together, what happened is the bigger company which took over FedEx, which is a bigger company which took over Kinko's, had to kind of amalgamate the structure and the culture of the Kinko's organization into its own culture and structure of the organization. Can you see that happening? Can you visualize that? So if you look at a different company, like for example, ASDA over the years in the UK has acquired a brand of stores called Nisa Global or Nisa Local, sorry. And when you look at two different organizations merging, what you will always find is that the culture and the structure of the organizations will have to be merged. So you can't have two HR departments, you can't have two finance departments, you can't have two of everything. So what will happen is the bigger company actually amalgamates the smaller departments within a company. So basically they take over and everybody is expected to follow their policies and their set of rules and guidelines which has been laid down. So in some cases you will see that when you have mergers and acquisition, you will also see that what tends to happen is a whole organization undergoes a change in culture, or the whole organization is reorganized from a structure point of view. Okay. And then very briefly, so for example, when it became FedEx, a big organization, what are the kind of services it still has? So it included, it has brought in something which was probably missing from its own long-term strategy point of view. So they have freight services, they have products like FedEx Express, they have FedEx on ground, they have a trade network, this and that. And the bit which was missing at their end was the print and office services which they bought in, and then it completely changed the structure of the organization. So it was no longer just a logistics and a courier company, but it then had services that it could cater to for its client, which is from a point of view of having remote office locations and, making those services available as a business center kind of facility. Now, let's look at bringing two things in. Again, back what we are discussing, structure and culture. So what does the organizational structure do? The structure actually provides a formal system of work wherein roles and responsibilities are clearly defined. So if you look at a receptionist within an office, he or she knows that my role is to look at these 3-4 things. If you have an accounts manager in the office, he knows that this is my particular role and responsibility, and this is the structure within which I work. So the receptionist works within an administration or operational role, and an accountant works within a finance or an accounting department and knows what responsibilities they need to do. Correct?
Yeah.
And an organizational culture, when you look at, it basically involves, it's a social behavior. That means a lot of individuals within a similar type of setup, we show a certain type of behavior which is reflected as a culture of the organization, and that involves nothing but the values, the policies, procedures which are laid down, which have to be followed by each and every individual within that organization. An example of that would be that every employee within a company, say for example, a hypothetical company that we look at, They have access to holidays, public holidays, and casual or sick leave. Now there's a set process which has been done wherein that process then enables you to claim your leave, or call in a sick. Say for example, if you fall sick, you can call in a day in terms of taking a day off, and those are things which are defined or ingrained within the culture of the organization. So there's a set specific process. So if you're not coming in and you're not well, who do you inform? You inform your line manager, and in writing you send an email to your line manager with the CC to the HR manager. Now that is something defined as a role. And because that everyone follows that as a kind of a routine when they need to do this, this then becomes the natural behavior in the organization, which is termed as, what is it termed as? Culture. Okay.
Okay.
Now let's look at different types of structures. Now there are various structures that you will get to see which are present or prevalent within organizations. So when you see structures, we are talking about these types. You're talking about a departmental structure. You're talking about a hierarchical structure. You're talking about a divisional structure, a functional structure. These are different types of structures that we see within an organization. Now, if I have to look at, say, for example, a functional structure means that you group the functions or group the departments vis-a-vis the type of functions they provide. And this is simple enough to understand. So if you have people who are providing HR services, payroll, appraisals, they do appraisals, they look at job responsibilities, job description, recruitment, selection. What kind of a function do you think they kind of work or belong to? People who kind of provide services within the organization, things like payroll, things like they are involved in performance appraisal, they are involved in, for example, trainings, they are involved in activities which are to do with, for example, dealing with holidays, recruitment, selection. What kind of a function is this?
Is it some sort of marketing function?
Oh, probably not. So let me ask you again. So for example, when you look at a particular business or a company or an organization, whichever word we choose, where do you think and what do you think, what type of people in the organization provide functions or these kind of roles, or have these kind of roles and responsibilities of doing performance appraisals for the year, across the year? They look at training and development for employees. They look at recruitment. They look at putting out job adverts. After the adverts come in, they look at selection, shortlisting. They look at also maybe managing the payroll and your salary slips, wage slip. What kind of a function is that? Which department in the company does that?
Human resources.
That is correct. So exactly. So when you group people, when you put together people in a group which work on the basis of their function, they do similar kind of things, then you group them into those particular functions which are similar, and that kind of a structure is called the functional structure, right? If I have a group of people which basically look after mergers and acquisition, accounting, taxation, company law, or maybe look at payroll and look at basically maintaining balance sheet, dealing with bankers, what kind of a function would that be within the organization?
Sorry, what was that last bit again, please?
People who work within the organization and manage or kind of provide services, like when they work within the department, which is they manage mergers and acquisition. They look at, for example, working with financial statements like cash flow, balance sheet, profit and loss, ledgers. They look at maybe the payroll. They look at investment, securing, say for example, finances. What kind of a people do you think? What kind of function is this within the organization?
Finance.
That is correct. So it is easy enough to understand that because I'm talking about the similar kind of activities which people would have the similar skills to manage, and when you group them together in a particular department and they all kind of have the same kind of skill set to be able to do those things, then what we are calling that grouping is as a functional kind of structure within the organization. So you have research and development, you have finance, you have marketing, you have sales, you have operation, you have logistics, you have HR. In some cases, it could be finance could be different from accounting. Finance would mean that they look at securing investment, looking at dealing with shareholders, look at long-term securing of capital loans, and that could be finance. Mergers and acquisition could be finance. But when you look at normal day-to-day operations, which are the things like dealing with invoices, making payments, looking at maintaining a ledger, looking at salary slips, that could be an accounting function. So what we are doing is we are grouping together people because of the same kind of roles and responsibilities and skill set they have, and that kind of a structure within the organization, if you get to see, is called a functional structure. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, when we look at let's look at a different type of structure. Now, when we look at a divisional organization or a divisional structure, what does that mean? Now, a divisional structure would mean, and to give you an example here so that you can put it in your perspective, is when you look at a very large organization, an organization like, say, Microsoft, an organization like, say, Marks and Spencer. Now, here, as you know, this company operates across geographies. And within each country, when I say geographies, I mean countries. So, for example, you look at, say, for example, Marks and Spencer. Marks and Spencer today operates in 14 different countries. So they operate in China, Japan, India, some Middle Eastern European countries, and also operate in UK. So when you look at this as an organization, they have the same set of departments, stores, services which they provide in the UK, and they might provide the same set of services in a geography like China, India, Japan, things like that. So they will have Marks and Spencer stores, they will have Marks and Spencer food, they will have, for example, other services which they provide in different countries. And that would mean that the operational setup would require for each country, a head of the organization, would require a legal department because you're dealing with different laws within different countries. You're dealing with different type of accounting practices. So that would mean it's like one large multinational organization which has operations in many different countries, but has to comply with law and legislation of those countries and has to employ local employee or labor within that countries, because of which what they do is they follow a divisional structure. So you will find Marks and Spencer in the UK, but you'll also find a miniature of what works within the UK as a department structure also in Marks and Spencer China. So there'll be a CEO in Marks and Spencer China, which might be internally, when we look at such a large organization like M&S, so you have a chairman of the company, which is basically, because it's a British company, its origins is in the UK. So everybody or all the country heads will actually report into the headquarter. And headquarter is based in where is the headquarter based? In the UK, right? So here, if I look at a divisional structure, what we are looking at is, this could be one structure which is being looked at in a particular country. That means if they have a presence in China, they have a product head, they might have a head of the organization there. There will be some research and development, there will be operations there, there will be human resources, and other heads within the organization. But this particular person will report into the chief executive officer or the group head of the organization based in the UK. So this could be a second country, and this could be a third country wherein they have operations. But the same structure replicates in every geography, and all of the heads of the organization then report into the head office of the organization, or maybe within to a board or a chairman of the organization. And that is where you get to see the divisional structure. So divisional structures, just to summarize, you will see it on organizations which are multinational. That means they are present across countries. They have very large set of operations. They have the same set of products and services which they provide across different countries and geographies. And because of that need at the scale of the operations, they kind of fit in something which is called a divisional structure of the organization. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, when we look at structures of the organization, we also talk about things like is there a centralization? Is there a standardization? Is there a formalization, specialization? Now, these are characteristics or, things which are required wherein when you have a different structure within the organization, some of these things become very central to how the organization works. So centralization is, if I look at, for example, Marks and Spencer, and Marks and Spencer, China decides to have, say, for example, a specific line of products. Do you think that the person who's the head of the Chinese side of setup as an organization in the company would be able to take the decision alone?
No.
No. The reason is because if they are going to introduce something that drastic that they decide that, okay, we will introduce a new product line within China, which is in demand by the Chinese consumers, that would mean that they would basically need some sort of a central approval from the head office, right? We had a recent case of, a lot of companies deciding that, the egg scandal, which basically happened, which is the release of pesticide and or an insecticide. And I think in the EU there was a directive that you need to throw away these eggs. So about 775 million, or I think 750,000 eggs were thrown away or done away with because they had traces of that insecticide. Now that decision was taken centrally, within the EU. The reason that was taken centrally within the EU, it could not be in that each country decides, no, my eggs are safe or this is safe, because what they did when they did the sampling, they found out that the traces of the same insecticide was present in a lot of different locations. So the decision taken was a central decision, and that affected each and every poultry farmer or each and every country in terms of European Union passing that directive that, okay, this batch of eggs need to be destroyed. Correct?
Yeah.
So do you see that is an example of what is called the centralization? That means there was a central decision taken or a directive given out, and everybody had to kind of follow that, right?
Yeah.
Now, when we look at certain laws that you have to comply with, say, for example, let's look at legislation in terms of employment law. Now, legislation in terms of employment law would mean that, every company needs to kind of use and bring that law into the usage of the when they employ people within the organization. Now, this particular law or legislation which is set by the government is nothing but an example of standardization. Correct?
Yeah.
So if you go and work within the company, according to the company's law, you will see that the equality and diversity has to be followed, data protection has to be looked at, there are certain other types of health and safety has to be looked at. So these are laws which have been created, which every company has to follow, irrespective of the fact that whether you are a small organization, a large organization, or a medium-sized organization. And to the degree to which this is kind of, effective is because this is a legislation, and that process is called standardization when we look at as a process. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, what is formalization? Formalization is that, say, for example, you do certain things, and a practical example that I would give you is like in this case, when Britain actually leaves the EU, or the process of Brexit is actually currently being formalized between the EU negotiator Michel Barnier and David Davis, the business secretary. And what they are trying to do between the two of them is, as two different countries or organizations, one is EU and the other is UK, they are trying to formalize the process of exit of Britain from the European Union. And because they have to do it within a structure, and that structure involves certain laws and legislation or policies and procedures, this is nothing but a process wherein they want to formalize how Britain will leave the EU. And that structure, when you see within the organization, and it is happening again and again, takes the effect of something called, formalization. Is that okay?
Yeah.
A simple example that I would give you is, if you decide to take admission into a university, there's a formal process to take admission, right? What is that formal process? You need to fill in the application form. The application form requires a personal statement. It requires your previous educational qualification, work experience, your CV. And then once it is given across in that tabulated format to the concerned department of admissions in the university. They will scrutinize your application, come back, do an interview, and once the interview is done, they give you an acceptance letter or a conditional offer letter. And because this process happens again and again, and it is formalized as a process, so anybody who wants to take admission will have to go through the same process. So when you have that as a structure, that is called formalization. Is that okay?
Yes.
Now, what is specialization? Now, specialization is, to give you an example here, would be when you require certain types of services, right? Like if you're working within the organization, you're not happy with your manager, who do you go to?
Your manager's manager.
Yeah. So when you
Or
go
the
to
union.
him, yeah, or go to the union. So when you go to him, why you're going to him is if it was something which was amicably solved or something which could have been resolved easily, you would have had a discussion with that person and you would have resolved it. But because it has not been resolved and it has now come to a stage when it is started to bother you, what you tend to do is then go to somebody who is going to give you some adverse, who is going to give you some, which is called, so you're going to go to somebody who's going to, I'm not going to try and use the word specialized, but it is going to give you some sort of a, advice or related advice which would help resolve that problem, right? So
Yep.
if I have a grievance and I go through the grievance procedure, but it is not resolved, what I have to do is then obviously retort to going to somebody senior enough to be able to solve that problem. And in that case, I have to go to somebody who is specific within the organization, which can provide me these specific services. So you might go to the union, and because you're going for this specific service to that particular person or that department, that involves you getting specialist advice to be able to resolve that problem. And that would mean that these persons that you go to or people in the department that you go to have had the experience in the past and are considered kind of specialist or subject specialist to be able to help resolve that problem. And that particular process, when you look at within the organization, would be a specialization. So an example here would be, if I give you an example of, let's look at understanding a car factory. And when you look at a BMW car factory, what you will see is that a lot of customers would come in and order the usual model, say a Series 3. But a few customers would want to customize their requirement in terms of maybe getting a specific color of leather seats, maybe getting a different type of a tire, or different type of suspension, maybe getting a sat nav and things like that. So they kind of have what is called a specialist requirement. And when you look at that specialist requirement, they would need to do customization of their order to be able to order those things as kind of add-ons to the car, correct?
Yep.
And for this, they might not be able to do it on the website. So they might have to go and visit a dealership or a showroom wherein they will have a conversation with one of the sales managers, and that sales manager then would be able to put that order on and take the order for that particular type of vehicle. And because it requires this intervention from a particular person, like a sales manager at the dealership, then requires some sort of a specialization to be, or some sort of a set of tasks to be completed for that order to be configured for the vehicle. And that means nothing but a specialization. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Now, when we look at, a lot of these modern organizations, what is happening now is there is a lot of flexibility which is being introduced into structures. Things like a simple example would be here that a lot of organizations today allow you to work from home. A lot of organizations have flexi timing. So because of this, what is happening is there is in the modern context, or in the current modern day context of the 21st century, a lot of these structures that we've been seeing from the industrialization age or post the World War II era, things like functional structure, divisional structure, hierarchical structure, matrix structure, are undergoing a change because the way things are changing in the modern context. So here, what we are looking at is, in the modern organization, basically the structures are now being formed on the basis of not the groupings of the function or the types of people that you work with, or the kind of skill set you have. Here the structures are now undergoing a change because there is flexibility required because of the way the companies work today. There is a lot of empowerment which is happening to the employees. That means a lot of employees now have the ability to be able to make decisions, so that if they can influence the output in terms of the output of the company, get more profitability in, and they are given more flexibility. And what is now we are seeing as a major change is happening is that a lot of organizations are now flattening out. That means the hierarchical structure, the divisional structures, the matrix structures are actually disappearing. So if you look at three different types of organizations that we are aware of. One is when we look at companies in Japan, Korea, what we do get to see is they have a very hierarchical structure. The top and this kind of a structure is quite authoritative. But when you come to the modern European organizations, here the structure of the organization is quite democratic. That means you will have people who are in the commanding position, are managers, are bosses, but they normally tend to take a decision which is both task oriented and people oriented. So that means they will take care that any decisions which they take are also not adversely affecting the staff which are working within the organization. But at the same point in time, they are more bothered and also concerned about that the objectives and the tasks or the goals have to be achieved within the organization by the set of people. When you go to the American side of organization, you will see that these side of organizations now are kind of flattening out. That means there's a flat structure within the organization. There's a culture of openness. When you look at organizations like Facebook, Google, Apple, these kind of organizations, a normal employee working at the shop floor could actually send an email to the CEO or request for an audience from a senior member of the team, and that allows access of employees to management within the organization without having to go through any structure. You don't need to write to a HR manager or line manager. If you have a grievance, you have a suggestion, you can straight away shoot that off to the top person in the organization. If that access is now available because of the modern day concept of organizational structures coming into the gig economy companies, or the 21st century companies. Have you seen that? Have you observed it, or have you heard about it?
Not really, no.
Okay. Have you been to an Apple store?
No, I've only seen the outside of it, but I haven't actually walked in an Apple store. But I've seen the Apple products in like PC World and other stores.
Okay. I think just to experience some of the, because I think we are all used to, I've kind of worked within organizations wherein the structure has been quite autocratic, or, in some organizations wherein the structure is quite democratic, wherein delegation happens. But if you visit organizations like, say, for example, go and visit, I would say as you go and visit the Apple store one of the days when you have time. And then you have a conversation with them with regards to a particular product, and you will get to see that at some point in time, the person that you're speaking to, if you have a valid discussion and you have some suggestions about the products and things like that, they would straight away give you the email address of Tim Cook or somebody senior in the organization, as if it's something that they are able to freely distribute. And that would give you a sense of idea that how the structures within organizations are not disappearing is because somebody at the shop floor, one of the sales assistant or whatever they call it, I think one of the genius bar assistants who basically deals with you, has the ability to be able to, show you the door, or basically the ability to be able to say, okay, you can have a discussion, maybe you can drop us an email, and that will help us improve the culture of the organization, or, we are open to suggestions. But you don't get to see that in many other type of organizations that we come across on a day-to-day basis. There is a structure. So, for example, you go to H&M, you go to any other organization, even the Apple store, if you have a return to be done, what they will do is each and every person within the Apple store can do a refund or can do a return. But when you go to an H&M or an X, what they will do is they'll have to call the manager to be able to authorize that refund. Have you seen that? Have you seen, say for example, if you bought something online and you want to go and return it, it's gone past the return date, they have to call a manager to be able to, do a refund or do a return because they have to be authorized before it is done. Correct?
Yeah.
But if you go and visit an Apple store, you would find that everybody within that store has the ability to be able to do a refund without having to resort to a manager. So that is an example that you will get to see practically if you go into some of these kind of organizations today, even the Apple store, for example, which is, when you're interacting with Apple employees, you'll see that the modern day organization structure is quite flexible within that kind of a company, within that store. And you will see that there are people who are empowered to take decisions there and then because they want to ensure that the customers, they create a customer delight. They are producing happy customers at the end of the day. That's why everybody talks so positively about companies like Apple, Google, and these kind of companies. Okay, so they are doing away with departmentalization. What I'm trying to say in this slide is these kind of organizations are doing away with departmentalization. They're doing away with the type of structures which we have grown used to seeing within other set of companies that we normally buy products and services from. Okay.
Okay.
Now, let's put one or two last things in perspective before we, bring this particular discussion to a close. Now, we know there is a structure which is always required, because if you want the things to happen the way they happen, and you want output to be done, you want predictability in the business, you have to have a structure within the organization. That's clear, right? Whichever structure you put in, and that structure is dependent on what kind of product or services that business actually does. So if it's a manufacturing organization, you will normally see a functional structure wherein there'll be a production department and engineering department. They work hand in hand, and they get all the other departments supporting them to be able to produce output. But when we move from understanding that the structure helps the company grow and achieve goals and objectives, what we tend to do also see is that they have certain sort of culture which develops because of the years of functioning, the way they function, the people, the kind of behavior the people show, that leads to us believing in us perceiving a certain type of culture which that organization actually exhibits. So when you look at a lot of car manufacturing companies close to Sunderland and Newcastle, and you have a lot of these car factories, Birmingham, for example, the Midlands, where we see a lot of these car factories that we have for Jaguar, Land Rover and stuff. Here, the culture of the organization is a shift culture. That means if you work within a company, they work 3 shifts, you work within a particular department, you're an engineer, you're a mechanical engineer, you are probably working in the department, operational department, you have certain roles and responsibilities. And because these organizations are big enough, they have, more and more, let's say not more and more, they have lots of people working within the company. And because they are departmentalized or they are into some sort of a function, they are grouped together, they exhibit a particular behavior. Now, because they exhibit a particular behavior and that structure exists within the organization, that these two functions combined actually affect the company in 3 different ways. One is it leads to growth within the organization. Sometimes it leads to diversification within the organization. And the third thing which affects the structure of the organization is basically looking at the corporate strategy. So when you see a big change happening within the company, suddenly, for example, when I don't know whether you've read this or not, but Marks and Spencer introduced Plan A in about, I think, 2010 or 2011. And this was introduced under the leadership of Sir Stuart Rose, who was the chairman of the company at that point in time. Now, what is Plan A? Plan A was that Marks and Spencer has pledged to use sustainable resources to reduce landfills and environmental pollution under its corporate social responsibility. So when it introduced that, what happened was the structure of the whole organization underwent some sort of a restructuring. And that restructuring basically affected the corporate strategy, how the organization was looking at growing in terms of diversification, and overall the growth of the organization and how it will be structured for the next 20 years was affected. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is, I'll send you a handout on this. This is an interesting read. If you do a quick search on Google for Plan A 2020 Marks and Spencer, you will receive, you'll probably come across to a few searches which will basically talk about how the organization restructured to alter its structure and the culture within the organization to ensure that it meets its moral obligation of, reducing waste going to landfills, and also, producing goods and services which will not, be detrimental to environmental or create environmental pollution. So when you look at these kind of things, there is a shake-up when that kind of a strategy is formed. What you normally get to see is that the structure of the organization changes and the culture of the organization also changes. And this is a long-term change which the organization is trying to do because of the new strategy it's trying to adopt, in terms of going further forward. Okay?
Okay.
And this is what I probably look at explaining in, why, and I think I'll probably ask you to read that document when I send you, which is Plan A, and that will kind of give you an idea in terms of how the structure changes and how the culture of the organization changes essentially when we look at, such kind of a strategy being introduced. So I'm going to stop here. I think let you read that handout, and basically that will give you some idea in terms of how does the culture impact the structure and the people of the organization. Okay. So a small example of that would be when they adopted that, say for example, when they adopted that particular thing, what they looked at was that they will try and bring in a reduction of 20% in the usage of electricity, across their stores. Now, they've also introduced a strategy under Plan A, which basically says that all our stores will become self-sufficient in terms of recycling, in terms of producing energy. So they will install solar panels and, other renewable sources of energy will be used to kind of, provide electricity and, operational things to the store itself. So when this kind of a thing happens is you will see that the structure, the strategy of the organization is going to influence the change in structure and the culture of the organization. That means every employee within the company which works within the Marks and Spencer store, when they close the stores in the evening, they've implemented something which actually puts everything to a standby. It puts everything into switch off position so that there's electricity which can be saved. So they put up posters as an example within each of these stores for the employees to ensure that when they leave the locker room or they leave the kitchenette, make sure that the kettle is off, the hot water is off and things like that. And that is a sea change in terms of culture within, trying to bring a sea change in the culture of the organization, because they want to make sure that each and every employee understands the relevance of that Plan A, which has been stipulated at the management level. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Does that give you some sort of a perspective of how it will, bring about that change? So that strategy is going to influence and bring a change in the whole structure of the organization and the culture of the organization. And that is not something which can be immediately effective. It will be happening by 2020. So the plan which was created in 2012-2013 is a plan which basically will see its implementation happening in a stepwise, in a phased out manner. And the entire 650 stores within the UK will actually follow that strategy, and that is going to be implemented by 2020. So they will expect every and every, any and every individual working within any part of the organization within Marks and Spencer to kind of adhere to that strategy and adapt it so that the culture of the organization changes. And what they want to be able to project outside is that as an organization, they will basically have self-sustainability for all the stores in terms of, renewable energy, reduce landfills, and also reduce environmental pollution. So that requires a buy-in. 5 minutes. They will require a buy-in from each and every worker working within the organization, and also certain processes will have to be put in place, which is why the plan is phased out, so that as an organization they can achieve this change for the betterment of the company, to meet these standards which are going to be set, by, say, for example, the environmental directive or the European directive for, some of these stores. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So basically, that kind of a change which comes across, in the organization brings across a change in the culture and also the structure of the organization, and that works only because the people working within those roles and people working within the organizations have a buy-in into that strategy. So each and every individual need to understand what is planning. Once they understand planning, they will need to understand what is their role in the implementation of planning and how they will individually contribute so that the organization is able to implement this change. And that is why the structure of the organization would change and the culture of the organization would change at the lowest level to the highest level. Okay?
Yeah.
So let me send you a bit of a handout along with a copy of this presentation, which will give you a perspective in terms of why we are discussing organization and culture and behavior within the aspect of the remit of learning outcome 1.
Okay.
Okay, good stuff. I will then obviously end this session here at this moment, and then what we will do is we'll catch up